I came from an all-girls school that's known for rallying students, if you've heard of it. And as early as elementary, I was already out in the streets yelling, "No to cha-cha." And I knew it wasn't about dancing. And we were also shouting about nuclear weapons, against nuclear weapons, and for world peace. With this kind of fiery environment, it was natural for me to find more explanation as to the things that we were fighting for. And so I discovered women's rights. I was binging on all of the books in the library when one day my classmate approached me and said, "Why are you reading that? We don't need it anymore." I was a bit upset, which was an understatement. And maybe I considered ending a friendship at that time because I couldn't understand why a peer, a fellow girl, would say that we didn't need it. It was about equality of women and men. Why wouldn't we need it? And sure, maybe we didn't feel like we needed it, but what about all those other women who were looking for it, who needed it in their lives? So I kept my friendship, but more importantly, I kept my interest with women's rights and eventually human rights. Back then, human rights was a vague idea in my head. I knew it was about freedom and how people were supposed to live their lives. And you might have heard of it a lot of times. You've probably seen it on television, looked at it on your news feeds, read articles. I mean, just this week, a controversial bill was passed in our legislative. And a while ago, permits were canceled because they wanted to protect the environment for the people living in those areas. So we've encountered it, and we've probably talked about it with friends and family. My family knows that we've talked about it a lot of times. And we have. And I've heard so many things about human rights. Human rights advocates have been called pakialamero. We've been called social justice warriors. I've heard protectors of criminals. And I've also heard aktivistang mambubundok. But there's no shortage of communities that go to human rights advocates or look to human rights mechanisms to achieve or fulfill a right that they needed. But what exactly was human rights? Human rights are rights inherent to all of us by virtue of being a human being, and it's codified under international law. We have conventions, we have treaties, we have customary international law telling us what human rights law actually is. And human rights actually sprung forth from a very dark chapter in our history. You see, back then, the international community gathered together and realized, had they codified these human rights early on, then maybe the atrocities and horrors of the Second World War would not have happened. And so we have the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, which sprung into several conventions that looks into specific rights and also elaborates on rights of specific communities or groups, like women, children, or migrant workers, for example. And it's been said that human rights have 4 characteristics. 1, it's universal because each and every one of us has it by virtue of just us being human beings. We were born that way. 2, it's indivisible. You can't pick and choose the ones that you want to address. 3, it's interrelated because each and every human right contributes to the fulfillment and the realization of the dignity of the human being. And lastly, it's inalienable because you cannot sell it, you cannot lose it. You can't sign it off in a waiver and be rid of it. And most importantly, no one can take it away from you. And when we look into human rights, who are the people that we are actually talking about? In human rights, we have the duty bearers. The duty bearer is the state, and they are the ones with the obligation to fulfill, promote, and protect human rights. And they are accountable to who? To us, every single one of us. We are claims holders, and we are rights holders, and we are the ones who can demand our human rights from these institutions. But we also have the responsibility to respect the human rights of others. And we must also be assertive in claiming our human rights. Okay, I know it sounds a bit confusing, maybe. There's a lot to take in. And there's just so many things with human rights. For example, we have the UDHR, and then we also have the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination, of all forms of discrimination against women. At the same time, we have the Convention on the Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination. We have the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. But we also have the International Covenant on International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. So see, there's ESCR, ICSCR, ICCPR, CEDAW, CERD, so Sally sells she sells by the seashores. It's all confusing, right? Like, there's just so many words and so many abbreviations. But most of all, it sounds very remote. We don't realize that we need human rights because of all these fancy words, when in fact, far from it, human rights actually permeate our daily lives like an invisible current. Take, for example, the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, the UDHR. So Article 18 says that we have the freedom of choice, we have the freedom of conscience, thought, or religion. I mean, all of us might have been born to a lot of us might have been born to the religion that we have today, but we aren't constrained to stay in one religion, or we can even choose not to have a religion in the first place. We have that choice. We also have the right to freedom of expression, or freedom of opinion. And when you look on Facebook, you see that there are so many opinions from one end of the spectrum to the other. And it means that we are able to give these opinions freely, and we aren't constrained to say what we think about. And we also have, for example, the right to rest and leisure. We have that in Article 24. And it basically means that we can all use these Cebu Pacific promos, right? So we have so many things. We have the right to have a standard of living that is adequate to our health, that will address our health and our medical needs. And these are the things that we need every day. These are the things that we see, or the things that we would want to have in our lives. So that would be security in our homes, the fact that we have a house in the first place. And it seems that we feel that the only time that we cry human rights is when we lose it. But is that the only time that it becomes relevant? It's very easy to forget about human rights when you're comfortable. But just imagine. Imagine if you have to line up for 2 hours just to get a bucket of water. Or imagine if you're not able to defend yourself when someone accuses you of a crime. Or imagine if you want to attend school but you can't. It's very easy to say, why do you read that? We don't need it. If we can come home to a house that we are comfortable in, if we can just turn on the tap and we get water, if we haven't experienced losing our jobs because we got pregnant, or if we have been prohibited from posting what we wanted on Facebook or on Twitter, it's very easy to forget and say that we don't need it if we have it in the first place, unlike other people. And just because you or me or the person sitting next to you has access to most of their human rights, it doesn't mean that we can say that we don't need it. Human rights affects all of us, every single one of us. And if we truly want to work towards a society or a community that is equal and recognizes all of these rights, we need empathy. We need to be aware and open to the struggles that other people experience. When I was a law student, I was very fortunate to have been accepted to the internship program of the Ateneo Human Rights Center. In that internship program, we would have an immersion, and we would be sent up the mountain or right next to the beach to live with a community. And we would be partnered. There were just 2 of us. And we would only have the things that we have in our backpacks. We only have our clothes. We only have 2 sets of clothing. They even counted the number of shampoo that we would use for that entire week. So in my case, I live with the Dumagat in Quezon and the Mangyan in Mindoro. Yes, I did it twice because I was a bit enthusiastic. So I have a picture here. So this is me. I don't look like that right now, but this is me. So this isn't a picture of me in my actual immersion. We weren't allowed to bring electronics, or we weren't allowed to bring any phones or cameras. So this was an immersion that I actually facilitated, but it gives you an idea of the environment that we were working in. And the next picture is me and my friend. We are actually taking a nice, relaxing time in the mountain river. So we can take the picture out. So when we actually went to the mountains, we would climb up and we would reach the communities, and we would cross so many terrains. We would cross rivers, we would walk underneath the sun, and there was just a farm beside us. And sometimes we walk into marshland. I remember when I stepped into the marshland, the mud went up to my thigh, and then there was a carabao next to me. So I kind of knew that it wasn't mud at all. Like, there was something else inside. So, nah. But you continue on. You plow through. You still walk because you want to get to that community, right? And when we finally got to the community, I was so exhausted that when I saw that we were up the mountain and there was just the grass with tiny yellow flowers, I actually burst into song. The hills are alive with the sound of music. So I was so tired. But the hills were alive. Our communities, even though they were shy at first, were curious and very welcoming. And if you name any kind of stereotype in, rural living, it's there. You have the mountain air, the cleanest air you could possibly breathe because you're so high up. You have bathing in the river, just like this one. You have long, relaxing hours of almost doing nothing. And of course, there are the chickens who wake you up in the morning at 4 a.m. because they're just right underneath the bed that you were sleeping in. And one time, it was so cold up in the mountain that the village cat actually went up to me and when I woke up in the morning, it was there right here on my chest. So that was cute, but this was the kind of picture that we had. It was very idyllic. But underneath this picture that we see, underneath the surface, human rights issues ran clear and strong. Understandably, food was an issue for the communities that we stayed in. When I lived with the Dumagat, the father of our host family, would make expeditions up the mountain to gather food for his family. And there were days that they didn't have any food, so my partner and I didn't eat as well. When I was in Tarambingan in Mindoro, the children would go down the mountain for 2 to 3 hours, jumping on the rocks, going down the path that was laid for them, just to go to school. And when it rained, they would run around with their makeshift raincoats made of plastic bags. And land was such an important issue for them. When I was in Tarambingan, the moment that our community found out that we were law students, not even lawyers, they gathered around our house and asked us all sorts of questions. And they were asking us about their land. Because what happened in Tarambingan is that while they lived in their community since time immemorial, since their grandparents, their fathers, their mothers were lived there all their entire lives, there were some Tagalogs, that was the term they used for non-indigenous peoples, who were claiming the land as theirs using titles or community tax certificates. But for these indigenous peoples, these are just mere pieces of paper. It doesn't compare to the spiritual connection that they have to the land that has nurtured their community ever since the beginning of time, maybe, ever since the very, very start. And it was a lot of pressure for us when we tried to answer them with everything that we knew about the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, because this wasn't any kind of recit in law school where we only had to think about grades. Our answers will affect the community, the future of the community, and will affect actual lives. The stakes were really high. And it was in that kind of world where I took myself out of my comfort zone. And it was in that kind of world that I realized that human rights was both near and so far. It's near because these communities knew about their rights. They knew what they would have to fight for, and they valued them. And they actively sought ways to find their human rights, to fulfill it. But it's painfully far because they couldn't access it as easily as others, maybe because of who they were or where they lived or their class or gender. 2 weeks was not enough for me to completely grasp the complexity of the lives of the community that I was able to live with, and I was very fortunate to experience. But those 2 weeks were enough to make me realize that this was the kind of work that I wanted to do. It's been said that human rights is both inspirational and practical. It's practical because it envisions a world where everyone can live according to what they want without hurting anybody. But it's also practical because it sets the standards and framework with which we can achieve our human rights. And since human rights is universal, we all have it. We can claim it, and we are able to claim it from the primary duty holders, duty bearers, and that would be the state. But unfortunately, systemic inequalities prevent a lot of communities from achieving their human rights. But I think that collective action is one way for us to resolve this. Just imagine lending your voice to the indigenous peoples, or lending your voice to women who have been silenced because of violence, or helping out someone who can't defend himself because due process has been taken away, or joining your voices with the cries of children who just want to have food. Just imagine how much stronger their voices will be, and imagine how much higher we can lift them up, and in doing so, lift ourselves up, lift our society, and lift our communities up. Our world is a jumble of realities, but if we want a just and equal world, we have to be aware of the experiences of people or individuals that we might not have personally encountered. If we let our view of the world be dictated merely by our personal experience, that the world is just and equal because we perceive it to be, then we risk ignoring the experiences of other people. We contribute to their exclusion, and we leave them behind. Some human rights might not affect us personally, but these same issues for others can be a matter of life and death. It is important for us to learn their stories, to know their context, and to be open-minded. It is important for us to listen. It is important for us to ask questions. Because if we believe that this is the kind of world that we want to have, it has to be exclusive. If we should not let our personal realities dictate our views of the world. It might not happen with a snap of a finger, but we can work towards opening our minds and our hearts to truly pave the way to a peaceful future. We have to keep asking questions and listening to these answers so that we are never, ever in danger of asking the question, why do we need it? Thank you.